Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Cost-Effective Methods to Eliminate Toxic Contaminants from Cannabis and Hemp Extracts. I'm Laura Bush, the Editorial Director of LCGC, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We're pleased to bring you this webcast, co-presented by LCGC and Cannabis Science and Technology, and sponsored by Sorbent Technologies, commonly known as SorbTech. SorbTech has been driving chromatography, extraction, purification, and testing innovation since 2000. Their years of experience in recommending products for difficult separations and their broad product offering uniquely qualifies them to assist those working with cannabis to produce pure extracts. Whether it's lab, pilot, or production applications, SorbTech helps fast-track research for successful outcomes. Before we get started today, we have a few housekeeping announcements. First, the webcast is designed to be interactive, so we encourage you to ask questions. You can submit questions at any time by typing them in the Q&A box, which you can find on the right-hand side of your screen. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small square icon in the upper right-hand corner of your slide window, or by hovering your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and dragging the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the webcast. And if you have any technical problems viewing or hearing the presentation today, please click on the question mark Help widget in the dock at the bottom of your window. I would now like to introduce today's speakers. We are very pleased to be joined today by Robert Kerr and David Schurer. Dr. Robert Kerr has more than 30 years of experience in analytical instrumentation and the application of chemistry to finding solutions to biological questions. He serves as an in-house scientist at SorbTech, and his current goal is the application of a new form of chromatography. His expertise in separation sciences includes instrument development, including conception, development, manufacturing, sales, marketing, and service. With well-developed skills in method development, including new method conception, development, optimization, and deployment, Dr. Kerr also provides excellent troubleshooting skills. He has served as principal scientist for various organizations and has founded several companies during his career. He earned a BA from Austin College, an MA from the University of Texas at Austin, and his DEA and DSc from the Université Louis Pasteur, Strasbourg I. David Schurer became immersed in laboratory and scientific supplies, working in his family's company, A Scientific, one of the largest laboratory chemical supply companies in the Northeast. He partnered in one of his father's entrepreneurial ventures, providing scientific instrument and supplies in Puerto Rico, and developed and nurtured new relationships with researchers and chemists in pharmaceutical companies and universities there. He later joined Scientific Adsorbents, Inc., and was responsible for growing sales in the chromatography division. In 2000, Schurer co-founded Sorbent Technologies, which provides companies, universities, and research laboratories with premium chromatography products, instruments, and solutions for analytical testing and manufacturing process purification. He earned his BA from Emory University in 1979. Thank you both for joining us today. David, please get us started.
Thanks, Laura. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And the purpose of today's webinar is to initially review information from last year's webinar and to refresh today's listeners who attended last year's presentation and to inform new listeners. It's basically the continuing saga of hemp cannabis purification, which has been a big challenge. So we're going to review what we did last year, and we always have Paris. We want to review the current state of the cannabis industry in the U.S., challenges of decontamination of pesticides and other harmful products, understand the complexity of cannabis chemistry, what we accomplished last year to decontaminate cannabis extracts. In part 2, we will introduce results we've accomplished over the past year, share new techniques and applications, provide direction for those who have contaminated products based on the different pesticides that have failed and their concentration levels. And this will include processes that you will be able to do with our guidance or may require SorbTech's proprietary Kerr decontamination method, aka KDM. So real quick, who is Sorbent Technologies? We're based in Atlanta, in Norcross, Georgia. We're in our 19th year. We specialize in products for chromatography and purification, from analytical to process scale. This includes all type of bulk adsorbents, flash chromatography columns, HPLC columns, equipment, and lab supplies. For the past 6 years, we've worked with cannabis testing labs, providing analytical chromatography consumables and direction, and as well as extraction facilities providing bulk adsorbents, silica gel, fluorosil PR, and C18, and directions and SOPs for decontamination of pesticides and the difficulty and the separation of cannabinoids. What I'd like to do right now is introduce Dr. Robert Kerr.
Good morning, everyone. There's no substitute for detailed knowledge. So what we're going to do is give you some of that. So why are we doing that? The contamination of cannabis and hemp is a major problem for those in cannabis world. We know this is so because virtually all of our cannabis customers, which is quite a few of them, have contacted us to find a solution to remove contaminants from their cannabis extracts. And we are committed to providing our customers solutions to produce safe products for consumers. So many of our customers have come to us to find a solution to remove contaminants from their cannabis or hemp extracts, and we have significant experience in the use of adsorbents in numerous areas, including natural products, which is where I personally cut my teeth, and we have been able to advise them on what is best for their needs. So what follows in the rest of this presentation is why we did this, how we achieved it, and how you can achieve it. So the first step in any endeavor is to define your objective. Otherwise, you can't know when where to stop or when you've achieved your objective. So our general objective is to eliminate toxic contaminants from contaminated cannabis and hemp extracts with simple, cost-effective procedures. That's the goal here. So, though it is an agricultural product, the level of contamination of cannabis, hemp, and their extracts is effectively not covered by current federal regulations. However, FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act of 1910, is still the federal law of the United States of America to protect applicators, consumers, the environment, and all products of all types. Toxic contaminants are things like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, plant growth regulators, and synergists, and are used by growers to improve crop quality, increase crop yield, increase their profit. Even with organically grown cannabis, frequently some contaminants are found due to their use on other crops in adjacent fields or persistence from previous applications, both in the aquifer and in the soil. So, toxic contaminants are commonly found in the plant material at the 0.1 to 50 ppm level per contaminant. The extraction process for removing and concentrating cannabinoids also remove and concentrate the toxic contaminants. The usual case is a concentration increase of the toxic contaminants in the extracts by a factor of 10 by comparison with the starting plant material, which is quite a lot. So I want to introduce a notion of the total contaminant load, which is all the contaminants added together. Now, This is extremely important because many contaminants have a common mode of hazardous action. That is, their toxicity is due to interactions with the same receptor in the human body. And for example, if there are 6 contaminants, each with a passable level, together they pose a threat that is equal to 6 times any one of them singly, since they work in the same way in the human body. So, in cannabis and hemp plant materials, the total contaminant load is usually somewhere between 1 to 25 ppm. But it's frequently 10 to 250 ppm, and sometimes it is even higher. So by law, the permitted TCL is a maximum of 25.1 ppm in Oregon, 33 ppm for inhalable products, and 10 times that, almost 300 ppm for edibles in California. And Michigan and most of the other states have followed Oregon and have the same list and have the same permitted levels. So we'll get into that into some more detail. All of these levels are clearly health risks to users, and state authorities have already begun to mandate action levels for specific pesticides. And eventually the federal health authorities will follow suit. Now, currently, only cannabis and its extracts are regulated, but hemp and hemp extracts can, should, and will be regulated as well. A question should always be asked, though, why? There's this tiny little bit of pesticide in my cannabis and hemp. I mean, it's only ppm. How can this hurt me? So what? More government regulations? More intrusion into our lives? Why do this? Here's why. There's a good reason for this. The safe concentration of pesticides in food products, or edibles in cannabis lingo, is established, well-known, and is relatively high due to poor absorption to the digestive tract or through the skin. However, it is not known what the safe, so-called, concentration of pesticides in the smoke of cannabis cigarettes or the vapor of vape products, including hemp. Now, it is known that substances in smoke are well absorbed through the mucous membranes in the bloodstream. Moreover, pyrolysis occurs during partial combustion, and numerous secondary products can be and are generated, and many of these secondary products are toxic. For example, when heat is applied to microbutanil, which is a common, widely used fungicide, it generates hydrogen cyanide, and hydrogen cyanide is definitely toxic. So it is known that up to 70% of whatever toxic contaminants are in the plant material or the extracts are in the smoke or vape. So how do we know this? We know this because some scientific experts in our field have measured it. Jeff Raber and his associates at the workshop in Pasadena, California, published this article in the Journal of Toxicology, Determination of Pesticide Residues in Cannabis Smoke. Now, in this article, they took 3 different smoking devices that were actually initially developed for the tobacco industry, and they measured 4 different substances in the plant material and in the smoke by GCMS, which is a very precise technique, and they measured recoveries of residues as high as 70%, well, 69.5 rounded up. That's quite a lot, actually. So what does this mean? It means that you, the farmers, growers, extractors, distributors, and regulators have a moral, ethical, and legal responsibility and duty to do something, to provide safe products for the consumer, your customers. Now, there needs to be a little bit of background here. Starting in 1973, the Oregon was one of the first wave states to decriminalize and legalize cannabis and hemp products. There were 11 other states that followed suit in the 70s, and most of the rest of the states have followed since 2001. Now, the current status as of today, July 2019, is 34 states have medical marijuana laws that permit you to have marijuana with a doctor's prescription. And if you add hemp oil, that goes up to 39 states. That's 4/5 of the states. 80% of our states permit medical marijuana or CBD laws. Now, only 11 states have permit recreational marijuana, and only 11 states are left that in which marijuana and hemp are still fully illegal. So, Oregon decriminalized cannabis in '73, and effectively they were the first in the first wave, and they have serious experience with regulating cannabis and cannabis extracts. So Oregon is the model that everyone is using, all the other states, and probably at the federal level later on. So it's important to know what Oregon did. So today, Oregon requires testing of cannabis products before they are sold. And at this time, California and Oregon are the only states to require testing for contaminants of non-medical marijuana products. So the current legal status in our state, in Georgia, is that recreational cannabis is still illegal, but medical marijuana is okay with a doctor's permit. And hemp is now okay as of this year, actually only a few months ago. And the business is just starting in this state. So, which is important to us since we live here. So, now that hemp is legal in Georgia, what can we expect in terms of regulations concerning contaminants? The answer is let's look and see what the other states have done, and we'll start with Oregon. So, in Oregon, the Oregon health authorities issued a technical report, which anybody can get very easily on the internet, and 59 contaminants must be tested in cannabis and cannabis-containing products before they can be sold in Oregon. So the action levels of the individual contaminants ranges from 0.2 to 2 ppm, depending on which contaminant you're talking about. So being below an action level is okay. Being above an action level is not okay. The permitted total contaminant load, everything added together, is 25 ppm. Now, please note that there are thousands, actually probably tens of thousands, of pesticides that are registered at the U.S. EPA under FIFRA, but we only test for 59 because most of them, in fact, aren't used, aren't produced for one reason or another. So now what is being regulated? Well, this is the list. Now, we're not going to go over this detailed list, but notice that it's listed by analytes, and that each one of these analytes has a chemical abstracts registry number, which enables you to know the exact chemical structure and well as to determine their physical chemical properties and their toxicological profiles. That's how you identify things. And there is a specific action level for each one of these pesticides. So the question is this a real problem? So the answer to that, let's look at the concentration of pesticides, Raid, for example, that you buy at the grocery store or at Home Depot or a garden center or wherever you buy your pesticides. And you'll see that this table, which goes from high to low, that the cells in yellow are the usual concentration of pesticides in that pesticide. Now, using the same scale for the same table, let's look at the concentration of pesticides in cannabis extracts, and you'll see that even though they have the same scale, that these other things overlap. So there can be as much pesticides in cannabis and hemp extracts as the stuff that you buy to get rid of spiders, ants, and roaches in your home. Now, I don't think that it's a good idea to be sniff and raid, although you can do it if you want to. So the question, is this a real problem? The answer is yes. Now, there are two other problems that we need to mention in connection with this contamination business. First, there are a lot of farmers, extractors, formulators, distributors, and in almost all states, there is in fact, in all the states, there's an insufficient number of analytical laboratories certified and qualified to do the testing. And the ratio is right now is about 10 to 30 cannabis businesses to one analytical laboratory, depending on the state. Now, what this means is, it's, for all these people, they, are having a hard time getting in the queue to get their stuff tested. That's a real problem. And the second problem, which is actually not so little, is the cannabis and hemp plant material and extracts are hard to work with. The matrix is a difficult one by comparison with other matrices, and the samples submitted to 10 different laboratories come back often with 10 different answers, and sometimes these answers vary by a factor of 10, 1,000%, and sometimes even more than that. I know because we've done it. We've had samples tested. Sometimes we'll spike stuff with 5 ppm, and it'll come back as sometimes with 2 ppm and sometimes with 75. And it means they're not always reliable, and it's because their methodology is not completely standardized and it's not up to point. So what can be done about decontamination? What can you do? So let's look at the methods that are available to eliminate these contaminants. First, there's contaminant-free crop growth. There's selective extraction. There's chromatographic purification. There's selective adsorption. You can destroy the contaminants by chemical reaction or use some combination of the above. So let's look at these one by one. Contaminant-free crop growth, it sounds easy enough, it sounds great. Just don't use pesticides. But this is not as easy to accomplish as it sounds due to persistence of contaminants in the soil and water and contaminants applied to adjacent fields. Contaminant-free water must be used, which requires a significant capital expenditure on equipment and a high cost of production in the required volumes. The result is lower crop yield, higher costs, and less profit. And very often, if you're growing indoors, they have to apply pesticides anyway because the pest comes in whether you want them or not. So this next part is selective extraction. All solvents extract a relatively broad range of solvents, and substances with similar solubility characteristics are always extracted together. So if your initial cannabis plant material has toxic contaminants, then your extract will have the same toxic contaminants no matter what solvents you use, and at a higher level than the starting plant material, up to 10x, because contaminants and cannabinoids have the same solubility properties. The result is selective extraction for this matrix is a myth. Even with CO2 extraction, under these conditions, CO2 is a liquid, so this is solvent extraction. So selective absorption, this works. It works well if you do it right. That is, there are selective adsorbents that achieve the objective. Then the chromatographic purification, this works. It does work with trained and experienced people and the right equipment. Now, the destruction of chemical contaminants by chemical reaction is what we do is to transform one or more functional groups required for biological activity into different functional groups, such that the biological activity, the pesticide action, human toxicity, whatever activity you're talking about is gone. This is not as difficult, painful, or as expensive as it sounds. So the reaction must transform the substance into a non-toxic entity. And it's actually fairly easy to accomplish, but there's a definite requirement. The chemical reaction must also leave intact the substances of interest, cannabinoids in our case, and this can be done. We did it and are doing it. So we'll go over some of these in more detail right now. Let's start with selective absorption. Now, there's quite a few absorbents available. This is a partial list, and literally is A to Z, alumina to zirconia. And I won't go through all the list right now, but let's go through the criteria we use to evaluate whether they can be used. First, it must be sufficiently inexpensive. It must be able to actually obtain the material. We must be able to safely dispose of spent material. It's got to be sufficiently efficient that it's economically viable, and it should be regenerable or reusable, and it's got to either selectively retain either the contaminants or the substances of interest, and it must have sufficient capacity to be useful. So if you apply these criteria, only the following absorbents pass all the criteria for being a viable absorbent: silica gel, normal phase silica gel, bonded phase silica gel, activated alumina, fluorosil, and polymeric absorbents. All the other potential absorbents fail one or more criteria. So let's start with the first one, normal phase silica gel. So the procedure is to dissolve the extract in a water-free alkane solvent, pass the mixture through a column filled with a drying agent, which prevents the silica gel from being deactivated by water. There's always a little bit of water, and we want to keep it all out because this enables you to reuse the silica gel over and over. And then we load the mixture, and you can go up to 50% by weight, although it's usually better to work at a little bit lower concentration, through a column filled with good quality chromatographic silica gel. After loading, you pass more alkane solvent through the column to wash out all the pesticides that can be gotten out, the lipophilic pesticides, under these conditions. And the cannabinoids are completely retained by the silica gel and cannot be recovered at this point. So then we pass about 2 to 4 column volumes of alkane with about 10 to 25% polar modifier to recover the cannabinoids. And then we wash the column for regeneration with 100% polar modifier and then with 100% methanol. And then we reverse that sequence and go back to 100% alkane, and you're ready to run again. So some of the results are, we have customers who are using our procedure daily for large lots of cannabis that are failing primarily due to chloridane and some other contaminants as well. So 250 grams of their extract, which is actually a distillate, for 1,000 grams of silica gel, which is 25% loading. They're getting 10 to 20 runs per day, depending on how long they want to work. And they recover virtually 100% of their cannabinoids, so they're not losing, what they're after in the first place, the valuable cannabinoids. And this procedure is very effective for contaminants that have no retention on silica gel, such as chloridane, etinoprox, chlorophenapyr, and there's several other contaminants as well. Excuse me. So there are other examples. We have many other customers using nearly identical procedures that they got from us to achieve this objective, which is to decontaminate their silica gel. Decontaminate their their cannabis extracts. So the advantages of using silica gel is it's relatively inexpensive, it's relatively high capacity, it's stable, and it can be reused over and over again if you protect it from water and wash the column out properly each time. And it's pretty easy to do. So the limitations are, well, it's not free, but it's not that expensive either, and equipment is required as well as trained personnel. So now let's look at the procedure for selective absorption with Fluorosil. The procedure for Fluorosil PR, which is magnesium silicate, is to dissolve the extract or distillate in a water-free alkane solvent, much like before, pass the mixture through a column filled with a drying agent, which prevents it from being deactivated by water as before, and then to pass it through the column, pass more solvent to recover all the extract, and evaporate the solvent. That's it. That's all you have to do. So we have numerous customers in California, Oregon, Colorado, and several other states who are using our procedure to decontaminate cannabis and hemp for lots large and small. Now, 10 to 15% is the maximum that you can load on it, or about 150 grams for a kilogram of Fluorosil PR. Now, do not use this procedure if your total contaminant load is more than 10 to 20 ppm. Fluorosil simply doesn't have the capacity to work with to absorb too much without regeneration. So you'd have to pass it through over and over again. And for example, this is one of our first runs when we were trying to determine the total contaminant load. We took 7 kilograms of a contaminated cannabis distillate that had about 100 ppm. It was reasonably well contaminated, and we passed it on to a kilogram of Fluorosil, and almost all of it was absorbed at 12.5% load. And you can see as we increased the loading, the total absorption diminished, and so we didn't diminish the total contaminant load. So this is the same results, but in a tabular form. At 12.5% loading with 100 ppm, we still eliminated 98.2%. Now, it's not the amount, not the dilution ratio, because we went ahead and tested higher dilutions, and basically nothing changed due to the loading. So the results were superimposable. So it's strictly the ratio of it's the amount that you load onto the column and the ppm. So Cascadia Labs in Washington, in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, measured this stuff for us. Now, for that particular run, using only Fluorosil PR, the biphentonate was highly reduced. It went from about 30 or 40 ppm down to about 2, or no, it was less than that. It still failed, but it was still highly reduced. And the biphenthrin was only slightly reduced and still didn't pass. And all the other contaminants were completely eliminated. And it's very important to note that pyperenol butoxide was completely eliminated. Fluorosil PR is the only adsorbent that will eliminate pyperenol butoxide. We'll go into that in a minute. I'm repeating myself now. So when you use lower loads, you can eliminate 100% of your contaminants. And this procedure is very effective for some contaminants, ineffective for other contaminants, and is the only absorbent that can eliminate pyperenol butoxide. Now, pyperenol butoxide is very commonly used as a non-toxic synergist that increases the insecticidal activity of many pesticides and is added to the vast majority of commercially available pesticide mixes. So it's non-toxic by itself. So the advantages of using Fluorosil PR are that it is stable as long as you pay attention to water content. It can be regenerated and used again with scrupulous attention to water content. It can be used at least 5 times. That's the only number of times that we've actually tested ourselves personally. Other people have told me that they can use it more often than that, but I haven't done it myself. And it's pretty easy to do. It's very easy to do, actually. So the limitations are that Fluorosil PR is relatively expensive. It's got relatively low capacity. It's pretty sensitive to water content. And again, equipment is required to do this. So let's go into the destruction of contaminants by chemical reaction. So the general approach is that there are many chemical reactions that are specific to a given functional group. This is how organic chemistry is done. So functional groups are things like alcohols, ketones, alkanes, alkenes, aromatic rings, heterocycles, amines, oximes, amides. It's a long list. And the cannabinoids have a set of functional groups, and the contaminants have a set of functional groups. But these functional groups do not entirely overlap. So to illustrate this, there is the red ring represents the set of contaminant functional groups, and the green ring represents the set of cannabinoid functional groups. And a reaction that will work only on the cannabinoids is not a good reaction. And if it works on the cannabinoids and the contaminants, it's not good, useful to us here either. The only reaction that we would want is something that works only on the contaminant functional groups. So we have found a chemical reaction, actually several, that does not react with cannabinoids or with the lower molecular weight terpenes, flavonoids, and other phenols in the cannabinoid extract. And it does react with about 75% of the regulated contaminants. And we have used this reaction which the totality of this application of the reaction includes some chromatographic cleanup to completely eliminate 100% cannabis and cannabis extracts, even at very high levels. We spiked it up to at 5,000 ppm, which is a lot. It's more than you're ever going to find in any extract anywhere. That's 10 times more. In our initial tests, we took 250 grams of cannabis distillate, already contaminated with about 10 different pesticides. It's the same extract I showed you before. And we spiked it with 5,000 ppm of 8 different pesticides and subjected it to our process. And in pilot runs, we have worked and are working with 1 to 5 kilograms of contaminated cannabis or hemp distillate, and we're subjecting it to this process. Now, in all cases, 100% of the contaminants are eliminated, and virtually 100% of the cannabinoids are recovered. There's always, 0.5%, 1%, and sometimes it's just weighing error. It may look like you lost 2%, but in fact, you didn't. This reaction is the MGM of decontamination, the meat grinder method. Whatever you feed into a meat grinder, be it sirloin steak, ribeye, chuck roast, prime rib, doesn't matter. It comes out as hamburger. And whatever is fed into this method comes out completely decontaminated. So now this is a proprietary procedure. And by that we mean we ain't going to tell you how to do it. We will do it for you. It's not free, but it's quite affordable. So if you're stuck with a highly contaminated product or even a medium contaminated product, then we can help you deal with it. For more details, just contact us. So today, July 2019, a cannabis hemp producer or extractor can take analytical test results and determine which procedure or combination of procedures are required to completely eliminate any and all pesticide residues in cannabis products. And contact us at sorbtech.com. So we've done our part. We have developed several inexpensive, cost-effective procedures using readily available absorbents to deal with extracts with low decontamination levels, 10 to 20 ppm, and we have developed an affordable technique to completely decontaminate any cannabis hemp extract, no matter how contaminated it is. So now you have to do your part. Listen to Uncle Sam and do the right thing. And Uncle Sam says, I want you to decontaminate your products. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you. Now back to you, Laura.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. It is now time for the question and answer period with the audience. So I just want to remind everyone that if you would like to submit a question, you can do that by typing it in the Q&A box, and you can find that on the right-hand side of your presentation window. All right, so let's pull up our first question.
Yeah, make it high.
Okay, here we go. Have you evaluated any of your decontamination methods for the removal of heavy metals?
Some people have, but they haven't communicated back to them. I know I will bet my life that the KDM will remove all the heavy metals. There's a part of the procedure that will absorb all metals no matter what. And working with silica gel, I guarantee you that heavy metals will not ever go through silica gel. They'll be complex and they'll stay there no matter what. So I mean that's very well known. So now other people, nobody's gotten back to me and said, hey, I've got the heavy metals still in there. What can you do about it? So I assume that they came out.
Excellent. What was your regeneration method for Fluorosil PR? Did you just flush or did you also bake it?
Well, you can bake it if you want, but to bake it you'd have to do it like the way the maker, U.S. Silica, does it. You have to bake it at 875 degrees centigrade. So what we do is keep water from getting in there in the first place, and then we occasionally flush it out with methanol. And the methanol we pass through a column filled with either magnesium sulfate or calcium sulfate to get rid of the water of the flushing solvent. Now, we haven't tried to do, we tested, we got 5 uses. That was, as far as we went here. Well, actually we did it in Oregon, but that's, that's as far as as many times as we did it. But unless you have a furnace that can bake this stuff at 875 degrees centigrade, which is pretty hot, if you have one sitting around your lab, go for it. But otherwise, they're pretty expensive. And, so if you want to do that, go for it. But I wouldn't, if I were you, I'd just buy some more once it got, completely messed up and wouldn't work anymore.
What is the maximum volume that you have processed in a day?
You mean the maximum weight? Yeah. I guess the maximum we've done is about 5 kilograms. I mean, I'm talking about ourselves or people I'm immediately associated with. So we have customers that are doing much larger volumes than that, but I haven't visited their facilities. I haven't seen it. So I don't want to say that
And most of the customers that we've dealt with, it's proprietary, so they're not going to necessarily tell us the volumes. But and it's also something that a lot of times we don't discuss. So we give them a direction, and then we ask for their feedback if it's working or not working.
Excellent. What are the resulting waste products from the chemical detoxification process? Are there any waste disposal issues that result?
KDM, Bob.
For the KDM? No, we recycle everything, basically. Well, I can't. It's nothing that the EPA is going to bother you about. Can't tell you what. There's only one thing you got to get rid of, but it's not regulated by the EPA. All the solvents and everything is recycled. What do they call that stuff? Zero discharge.
Yeah, and also on the back end, based upon the stationary phase columns we can use, those are typically easily disposed of. No different than any chem lab would be utilizing silica gel, fluorosil, or alumina, or any other basic stationary phase.
Right, and even when we do have to get rid of we recycle the solvents, and after we wash, let's say for example we're using silica gel and only silica gel, we redistill the solvents, and at the bottom at the end, after we've washed all the pesticides out, we have some pesticides in there, but we're talking about ppm. That's milligrams per kilogram. So even if you processed 1,000 kilograms and it was heavily contaminated, you're talking about a gram or two of pesticides. It's not very much. And just, take that little bit and put it in a hazardous waste pile and have it hauled off. I mean, it won't cost you very much to get rid of it. Because there's not very much of them there, in fact,
What pesticides cannot be removed by silica gel and fluorosil?
Well, together they can remove almost everything except pyperenol butoxide. Fluorosil. No, fluorosil gets rid of pyperenol butoxide. Fluorosil does not help you very much with nitrogen heterocycles. It works quite well with the oxygen heterocycles. Anything that contains amines, oxines, stuff like that, fluorosil does not work well with. Okay, but if you use them together, they do pretty well. Just remember that fluorosil has a pretty low, relatively low capacity. Silica gel has a very high capacity.
How does the decontamination work when you say you do it for us?
Well, give us a call and we'll tell you all about it.
Yeah, it's a proprietary method right now. So we initially did a benchtop version analysis just to prove it. Right now we're doing a pilot analysis at like 5 kilo level. Once we've done a little bit more work on it just to vet that we're removing all the spike contaminants at the levels that they're spiking it, then we're going to look at and try to figure the best way to introduce it to the public.
Right, and also we've tested the at the end of the KDM, we have to test it to make sure it still smells good, looks good, tastes good, and so on. Because somebody that decontaminates it and gives it to a formulator, they're going to put it in a product,
right. So
like candy or gummies or brownies or whatnot, and you can't use it if it smells funny, right? People won't buy it, and it's probably not good for you. So we tested that, and they all said it's good. So there you go.
Water and soil are often contaminated with perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS. Have you evaluated removal of PFOA, PFOS, and other PFAS, for example?
No, they are not regulated for these contaminants. I'm only concerned right now with things that are actually regulated by the state. I mean, I can't, look at every. Hang on a second, Laura. Sorry. I can't look at every possible contaminant. I'm only looking at, what the state actually regulates. That's it. Thank you, Laura.
Sorry about that. Can you use anion exchange resins as a pretreatment to your procedure?
Well,
we're evaluating that. That's one of the
we
things.
have evaluated that, actually. The thing is, a lot of these pesticides don't have ionizable groups. In fact, almost none of them do. Only a few do. So, you can go do ion exchange, anion or cation, either one. But, most of these, for anion or cation exchange to work, you got to have something that's either got a permanent charge, like a quaternary amine, or something that's ionizable. Or, for example, sulfonic acid, even with a trace of water, sulfonic acids, are completely ionized. But, we don't have any sulfonic acids, I don't believe, for any of the regulated contaminants. And I know for a fact we don't have any quaternary amines that are regulated contaminants. They're not going to absorb basically anything. So there's really kind of no reason to use them.
Do you license the KDM approach or offer it as a fee for service?
We're trying to evaluate the best way to handle that. Right now, as I mentioned, we're finishing up our own pilot studies, as Bob said, to make sure that, number one, it removes all the contaminants, and two, that it doesn't affect the cannabis or terpene profile, and as well as that we maintain yield. So we'll know more, I would say, by the end of August, probably September, we'll know what the next way will be.
Plus, we're in Georgia.
Yeah, so which means that we'll be working with companies outside the state, because we can't be bringing in material into Georgia.
We can't. Cannabis is illegal here, even with the passage of the hemp farm bill and the medical marijuana bill, and only hemp. We can work on hemp, but only hemp. And, right now there's no license that's been issued. The Department of Agriculture here in Georgia is waiting on the federal approval of their plan. So Texas, Georgia, and several other states have submitted plans. The ones that deregulated it actually this year, they're now submitted their plans to the Department of Agriculture and the EPA. No, I think it's only the Department of Agriculture. And they're waiting for their plans are approved before they start issuing permits. So we can't legally do anything commercially here with that.
Right, but we're looking at partners in California and other states.
You mentioned that results from analytical labs vary. Why is that, and how much variability have you noticed?
Well, we've noticed a lot of variability, and there are several reasons. A lot of labs use the dilute and shoot method. They just take the cannabis extract. Just take the cannabis extract, dilute it, and inject it right into their LCMS. And what that means is you have coelution of the cannabis, the cannabinoids at very high concentration with the very low concentration of the contaminants. And because of that huge concentration difference, there's a variable ionization efficiency of the pesticides in the ion source, which then goes into the mass, and it's usually accelerated, but not always, depending on your mass analyzer. Anyway, it goes into the mass analyzer, but depending on how much you ionize, you get a different signal. And so if one time you get, for a given quantity, if you get 30% ionization efficiency, and the next time you get 70% ionization efficiency, you get a very different signal. That means that it's not, you get very different results. Now, so that's one of the reasons. A lot of people are still using this dilute and shoot method. The second reason is a lot of these people are not heavily trained, right? They're not, and they don't necessarily maintain their instruments to the same degree that, say, a pharmaceutical company doing pharmacokinetic results. They don't, you have to calibrate your instrument constantly, especially if it's a mass spec, which is what they're all using, which is required due to the sensitivity required. So another reason is there have been reportedly some Quetcher's methods and other SPE solid phase cartridges that have been developed, and the instrument companies say one thing about their results, but from the field, people at the analytical companies, because we put this company to them pretty bluntly, and they what they get is different from what the people that sell the instruments and the SPE cartridges say. So I've taken it. One of my tasks going forward, I'm already working on it, is to develop a SPE cartridge that is easier to use and gets rid of all the contaminants and leaves only the pesticides. So we'll eliminate the matrix effects. That's very commonly analysts say, "Oh, I understand it's different." Well, that's the matrix effect. As if saying that means something. What we know is that it ain't right. So we've got to, since they're not fixing it, we're going to help them fix it. So,
and Bob meant actually not getting rid of the contaminants, but getting rid of the cannabinoids.
Yeah, cannabinoids. Getting rid of what interferes with measuring the contaminants, the pesticides. It's mostly pesticides.
What magnesium sulfate ratio do you typically recommend to ensure water removal from the solution?
Well, actually, I usually use calcium sulfate because it's got a higher capacity. But if I've got say for a kilogram of say Fluorosil, I'll use at least 100 grams, and I can do quite a few injections, runs with that. At first I did the weight for weight, but that's not really necessary because this stuff is highly absorbent, and there's not much, if you're using hexane or heptane, they don't have a lot of water in there, but they got some, so you want to get everything out to make it last as long as possible. So I'd say 10 to 1, 10 for 1,000 kilograms of 1,000 grams of Fluorosil, I'd use 100 grams of calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, or some other drying agent.
Is the 50% loading for silica gel based on cannabinoids in the sample or raw weight? And have you noticed a difference in performance between acid and decarboxylated cannabinoids?
Yeah, it's by total weight. Everything in there, not just the cannabinoids. It's got to be the total weight. It's the total weight of whatever you introduce on there, not of the active ingredient. So if you've only got a 30% cannabinoids in your sample, then you've got to calculate for the initial weight, not for the amount of cannabinoids, right? Because that's what the column sees. Column doesn't see only the cannabinoids. And then what was the other part of that question?
So the other part was, I lost it now.
The acid form.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, CBDA and THCA are unstable. They decarboxylate at the drop of a hat. So, and the CBDA and THCA, if you, for example, with silica gel for sure, it's hard to get them all off at the end. They just keep trailing on unless you add an additive, say like acetic acid, to get them all off. But then you got to get rid of the acetic acid. So it's best to go ahead and decarboxylate it to begin with, so that you only have CBD and THC, and then there's also all the other cannabinoid acids. Just decarboxylate everything, and then do the decontamination procedure. That's what I found best. If you worked with the crude extracts, which are mostly but not all, in fact, a lot of people think that their extract is pure acids, and in fact it's only half acids. It's already been half decarboxylated. We've got a customer right now that we're having to change his procedures, because because they think they've got only acids, and that's not exactly the case. It's about half decarboxylated.
Let's get in one last question. Do you work with companies outside of the United States, such as in Canada?
Sure. If we're currently working with companies in different countries, so yes, we are working outside the U.S. Great question.
Fantastic.
You got the money, we'll find a way.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up. Thank you very much for your talk today and for answering all those questions.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Laura.
I also want to thank
Thanks,
everyone in
everyone.
the audience. Exactly. I want to thank everyone in the audience for attending and participating in our event today. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Sorbent Technology, for making today's webcast possible. You'll receive an email alerting you when this webcast is available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who might have missed today's live event. We hope to see you all next time. Goodbye.